Last time, we analyzed the battle system of the Generation 1 Pokémon games. Now, I'm gonna talk about playing the game with only one Pokémon, followed by a comparison of how each starter choice affects the player's experience. Back in the 90s, we all knew those kids who played through a Pokémon game with just their starter. It could be for many reasons. They either liked their starters too much, or were perhaps too young to comprehend the concept of capturing Pokémon. Sometimes it was a language barrier that kept the player from fully understanding the game, which was something I personally saw a lot. For example, I distinctly remember talking to a kid that was in 1st grade and had just defeated Brock in Pokémon Yellow, using just Pikachu. A level 40 Pikachu. The surprising truth about playing a Pokémon game with a single Pokémon is the fact that 9 times out of 10, it's much easier than doing what the game suggests and capturing more Pokémon. With a high enough level difference, even the type advantages don't matter much, especially if the player's Pokémon is a starter. A player who just walks around aimlessly with their starter, increasing it beyond the range of the current area, will certainly have an incredibly easier time. I naturally can't say for certain if this was intentional or not. But it is interesting that Pokémon can reach level 100, but the highest leveled enemy in the game is a mere level 62. Regardless of its intentionality, this further reinforces the design philosophy of the game being playable by anyone. Of course, there is one small problem when playing the game with a single Pokémon, and that is the need of AGM moves. Luckily, there are Pokémon capable of using each AGM very close to where they are first needed, like Bellsprout and Oddish close to where the player gets AGM 1 cut, or Voltorb close to the cave where AGM 5 flash is needed. The game also gives players a Lapras, capable of using AGM 3 Surf and AGM 4 Strength, and a very strong Pokémon all around. Finally, the starters can all learn some AGMs. A player who chose Bulbasaur or Charmander can simply complete the whole game without ever catching a single Pokémon for AGMs, as they can use this Lapras for Surf. Still on the subject of starters, I think it might be worthwhile taking some time to talk about how each starter Pokémon differs from the others, and how their particular strengths and weaknesses may shape the player's experience through the game, especially early on. Keep in mind that I am in no way talking about multiplayer here. I'm considering how those Pokémon work purely against the game's challenges. Squirtle, the water type, is a slow but very strong and resilient Pokémon, hence the fact it's a turtle, and later literally a tank. The water type has 2 weaknesses: electric and grass. The first is quite rare to find in game, and surprisingly many of them either don't have electric moves, like Voltorb, or learn only weak moves, like Magnemite. Grass is more common, but the grass type lacks many strong moves in this game. Couple that with the fact that Squirtle can learn through TMs ice type moves strong against grass, and also the ground type Earthquake, and you have a very strong option. Early on, Squirtle will make the player's life relatively easy. The first gym, Rock type, is weak against water, and both of the leader's Pokémon actually have a double weakness to it, meaning even a simple bubble will likely destroy them. There aren't many Pokémon weak to water early on, but hikers are aplenty, and those usually carry the same Geodude and or Onix as Brock does. The second gym is a water type, and Squirtle can, at least, tank their hits pretty well. It gets more complicated from there, with the 3rd and 4th gyms being exactly Squirtle's weaknesses, electric and grass. At this point, however, there is plenty of access to different Pokémon that can easily defeat those gyms in Squirtle's place, so it's not such a huge downside. Summing up, Squirtle is a very versatile and sturdy Pokémon that will make the early game relatively easy and will be potentially a very powerful monster by late game. Bulbasaur, the forgotten grass poison type, the odd man out of the trio for starting with a 2nd type, and the butt of 2 decades of jokes about nobody picking it. Due to its double typing, Bulbasaur has a wide range of weaknesses, Fire, Flying, Psychic, and Ice. Flying in particular is rather common, while the other three increase in number in the later game. Offensively speaking, Bulbasaur also gets the short end of the stick. Despite being a poison type, it can't learn a single offensive poison move in this generation, which makes the second type only good for making it resistant to the rather rare fighting type. A grass type is also quite limited offensively, being only strong against water, ground and rock, while ground and rock are very frequently paired up in the same Pokémon. However, that's also where Bulbasaur shines brightly, the early game. The first gym will be as destroyed by Bulbasaur as by Squirtle, but our Grass Frog thing also has the advantage against the second Water Gym and a resistance against both the third Electric Gym and fourth Grass Gym. Also, very early on, the player has to cross the Viridian Forest, full of Weedles. Those little worms can cause a headache by poisoning the player's team, but Bulbasaur's poison type makes it immune to this nuisance. Sadly for our grass friend, it's all downhill after the fourth gym. The 5th, 6th and 7th gyms are all strong against grass or poison, and Bulbasaur's lack of offensive options isn't very useful against the abundance of poison types used by many trainers in the game. Bulbasaur in Red and Blue is likely the best choice for beginners, making the first few areas really easy. It probably won't have a lot of use later in the game for most people though. Charmander, the Fire-type starter, gives the player the roughest early game, by far. As a Fire type, it's weak against rock, ground and water, meaning it will be completely useless on the first two gym fights. Not only that, but the lack of strong offensive options against the rock-hard defense of the first gym leader means the player will either have to train Charmander to a very high level, usually to the point of evolving, or find something that can hit rock types super effectively, or even with special moves. This usually means capturing a Caterpie in Viridian Forest and training it up to a Butterfree when it learns the Psychic type and special stat-based Confusion. Pokémon Yellow and later the remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green changed that a bit, but I'll get to that later. After that, Charmander gets only one gym it's strong against, and it's also weak to the last one. Ground? Kind of. Upon evolution to its final glorious form, Charizard, it gets an additional Flying type, and with it, immunity to ground type moves. Sadly, this also increases its weakness to rock and gives it an electric weakness. Thankfully, like Blastoise, Charizard also has plenty of offensive options. It naturally learns Slash, a normal type move that has high chance of causing critical hits. Critical hits in Red, Blue and Yellow are based on the Pokémon's speed, and Charizard, while not the fastest, is rather fast. It can also learn Earthquake, giving it coverage against both rock and electric types. In Red and Blue, sadly, Charizard lacks any flying type options, but Yellow lets it learn Fly. This doesn't really mean much battle-wise, other than the extra coverage against fighting types, but come on, it was criminal that this dragon couldn't fly. Charmander will give players a very different experience from Bulbasaur and Squirtle. The early game will likely be more difficult, but this very offensive not an actual dragon-type dragon can be extremely powerful after it clears those initial hurdles. As I mentioned before, the dragon type is designed as a boss type, so this is why Charmander is not an actual dragon, for balancing issues. Every new game in Pokémon is unique, and that starts with the choice of the starter. Every time there's a different story, simply by how the player's team is always different. On the next part of this series, we'll go back to where we left off in part 1, Viridian City, and take a look at a few more Pokémon. I'll also pull back and talk about how the game organizes its areas and its Pokémon distribution, but that will be in 2 weeks. Next time, we'll take a 1-week break from Pokémon to start talking about a different game, a big indie hit from last year that is definitely one of the most unique and well-crafted games I have ever played. Next week,